There's a quiet battle many seniors face every night, a struggle that often goes unnoticed by the world, yet one that profoundly shapes their days. It's insomnia, the thief of peaceful sleep, quietly robbing rest and replacing it with endless hours of tossing, turning, and counting minutes that never seem to pass. For millions of older adults, sleep no longer comes naturally. The nights grow longer, but the moments of genuine rest become scarce and fragile. This isn't just about the occasional bad night or a few restless hours. For seniors, insomnia is a persistent shadow, a constant companion that drains vitality and dims the light of each new day. Imagine waking up, not feeling refreshed or renewed, but heavy, foggy, and worn down. Imagine the frustration of lying awake while the world outside drifts peacefully into dreams. It's a silent struggle, one that touches the very core of what it means to age with dignity and joy. Sleep, as many of us have learned, is much more than simply closing our eyes. It is the body's natural healer, the mind's reset button, the sacred time when cells regenerate, memories are solidified, and energy is replenished. When this vital process is disrupted, the consequences ripple far beyond fatigue. Studies reveal that chronic insomnia in seniors is linked to increased risks of memory decline, depression, weakened immunity, and even cardiovascular disease. The body, deprived of its nightly restoration, begins to falter, and the spirit grows weary. Yet the path to a good night's sleep is not always straightforward. Many seniors turn to prescription medications or over-the-counter sleep aids in search of relief. While these might offer temporary respite, they often come at a cost. Dependence, grogginess upon waking, confusion, and a dulling of mental sharpness are all too common side effects. Worse still, these drugs rarely address the root causes of insomnia. Instead, they mask symptoms, leaving seniors caught in a cycle of restless nights and weary mornings. But what if there was a different way? A path less traveled but deeply rooted in nature's wisdom. One that doesn't rely on pills or chemicals, but embraces the power of wholesome food and natural rhythms. What if the remedy for insomnia lies not in a bottle, but on a simple plate? The foods we choose to nourish ourselves with every day might hold the secret to soothing restless minds and bodies. Across centuries and cultures, healers have long known that food is medicine, that what we eat shapes not just our physical health, but also our mental and emotional well-being. Modern science is now catching up, uncovering how certain foods contain natural compounds that promote relaxation, balance hormones, and enhance the quality of sleep. For seniors, these foods can be a lifeline, gentle, safe, and profoundly effective. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore 5 remarkable foods, carefully chosen by doctors and backed by research, that can help seniors reclaim the deep, restorative sleep their bodies crave. We'll learn not just about their nutritional power, but about the stories they carry, stories of healing, renewal, and the intimate relationship between the Earth's gifts and human well-being. If you or a loved one has spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until dawn, feeling trapped in the silence of insomnia, this journey is for you. Together, we will unlock nature's secrets, paving the way to nights filled with peace and mornings brimming with vitality and hope. Because growing older doesn't have to mean surrendering to sleepless nights. There is a better way, one that honors the wisdom of the body, the rhythm of life, and the healing power of the food on our tables. Sleep troubles in older adults go far beyond simply lying awake at night. Insomnia is a complex, multi-layered challenge, one that intertwines with the natural aging process, physical health, emotional well-being, and the subtle changes within the brain itself. To truly overcome it, we first need to understand what's happening beneath the surface. As we age, the body's internal clock, known as the circadian rhythm, begins to shift. This natural rhythm, which tells us when to feel awake and when to sleep, becomes less consistent. Many seniors find themselves feeling sleepy earlier in the evening but waking up far too early in the morning, unable to return to sleep. The deep, restorative phases of sleep also shorten, leaving the night feeling fragmented and incomplete. But biology is only part of the story. Hormonal changes play a critical role, especially the gradual decline of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep-wake cycles. Produced in the brain's pineal gland, melatonin signals the body that it's time to wind down and prepare for rest. In seniors, melatonin levels often diminish, making it harder to fall asleep naturally and stay asleep throughout the night. Physical discomforts common in aging, such as arthritis pain, restless leg syndrome, or frequent urination, frequently disrupt sleep as well. Even more, chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and respiratory disorders can interfere with the ability to get quality rest. In this way, insomnia often becomes a symptom of deeper health challenges, rather than a standalone issue. Beyond the physical, the emotional landscape is equally important. Loneliness, anxiety, depression. These feelings are sadly prevalent among older adults and can trap the mind in a cycle of worry and tension at bedtime. Stress hormones like cortisol surge, making relaxation nearly impossible. And when the mind races in the quiet hours of the night, sleep slips further away. It's no surprise that many seniors reach for sleep medications, hoping for relief. But while these drugs can lull the body to rest, they rarely provide the true restoration that natural sleep offers. Worse, their side effects, including daytime drowsiness, confusion, and even falls, can severely impact quality of life. Some seniors develop a reliance on these medications, creating a new set of challenges in an already difficult situation. This is why understanding insomnia as more than just not being able to sleep is so vital. It is a symptom deeply woven into the fabric of aging, a signal that the body and mind need care, attention, and support in a holistic way. It invites us to look beyond quick fixes and embrace solutions that nurture the whole person: physical health, mental calm, and emotional peace. Among these solutions, the role of diet often remains overlooked. Yet food, as a fundamental source of energy and healing, has the power to influence sleep patterns profoundly. Certain nutrients can encourage the production of sleep hormones, reduce inflammation, and soothe the nervous system, all crucial for drifting into restful, uninterrupted sleep. As we move forward, we will explore how embracing the right foods can serve as a gentle yet powerful ally in this battle against insomnia. These are natural remedies that work with the body's innate wisdom, supporting seniors to reclaim the rest they deserve, night after night. Because insomnia in older adults is more than just a nighttime nuisance. It is a complex interplay of body, mind, and environment. And when we honor this complexity, we open the door to real healing. Imagine this: every meal you enjoy carries within it the power to heal, to soothe, and to restore the delicate balance your body needs for peaceful sleep. The foods we eat are not just fuel, they are medicine in its purest form. And when it comes to battling insomnia, especially in seniors, nature offers some of the most potent remedies, hidden in everyday ingredients that have nourished humanity for centuries. Long before modern science unraveled the mysteries of sleep, ancient cultures understood the intimate connection between diet and rest. Traditional herbalists and healers recommended specific foods and drinks to ease the mind and prepare the body for slumber. Today, researchers confirm these age-old truths, identifying key nutrients and compounds that help regulate our internal clock and calm the nervous system. Sleep is a complex biological process, orchestrated by countless chemical messengers and hormones. Nutrients from our diet play crucial roles in this symphony, from producing melatonin and serotonin to regulating blood sugar and reducing inflammation. When seniors consume the right foods, they provide their bodies with the raw materials needed to activate these sleep-promoting pathways naturally. For example, magnesium, often called the relaxation mineral, helps quiet the nervous system, easing muscle tension and anxiety. Tryptophan, an essential amino acid found in many protein-rich foods, is a direct precursor to serotonin and melatonin, the chemicals that signal the brain to prepare for rest. Complex carbohydrates can support the absorption of these compounds, while antioxidants found in fruits and vegetables fight oxidative stress, a hidden disruptor of sleep quality. But it's not just about individual nutrients. It's about how these elements come together in foods that nourish the body holistically. Whole foods, minimally processed and rich in natural compounds, work synergistically to heal and balance. In contrast, diets high in sugar, caffeine, or artificial additives often exacerbate insomnia, feeding inflammation and stimulating the nervous system when it should be calming down. For seniors, embracing foods that support sleep isn't merely a lifestyle choice. It's a vital step towards reclaiming health, vitality, and independence. When nights are restful, days become brighter. Energy returns, mood stabilizes, and the mind sharpens. This is the transformative power of food as medicine. In the chapters ahead, we will unveil 5 specific foods that stand out for their remarkable ability to improve sleep quality in older adults. These aren't exotic or complicated ingredients. Rather, they are accessible, natural, and often already present in the kitchen. Each one carries a unique blend of nutrients and ancient wisdom, offering a gentle, effective way to support the body's sleep mechanisms. Together, we'll explore not only the science behind these foods, but also practical ways to incorporate them into daily meals. Because healing sleep through diet is not about restriction or deprivation. It's about rediscovering the pleasure of nourishing the body and soul. The journey towards better sleep doesn't have to be difficult or overwhelming. Sometimes, the simplest changes, a handful of walnuts before bed, a soothing cup of chamomile tea, or a plate of leafy greens, can make all the difference. So, as we prepare to dive into these 5 natural sleep aids, remember this: nature has always provided what we need. The path to restorative sleep may be found in the vibrant colors, textures, and flavors of the foods we choose every day. Let's delve deeper into the magic of these 5 superstar foods and see exactly how you can harness their power every day to reclaim your nights and wake up feeling truly rested. 1. Tart cherries, the nighttime whisperer. Tart cherries aren't just a tasty fruit, they're a natural gift to the sleep-deprived. Their secret weapon, melatonin, often called the sleep hormone. For seniors whose melatonin production naturally declines with age, this little fruit can be a game changer. Imagine a senior named Mary. She struggled for years with tossing and turning, waking up multiple times at night. When her doctor recommended adding tart cherry juice to her evening routine, Mary was skeptical. But after a few weeks, she noticed the difference. She fell asleep faster, woke less frequently, and even felt more energetic during the day. Scientific studies back up Mary's experience. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that participants who drank tart cherry juice twice a day increased their total sleep time by over 90 minutes. The antioxidants in cherries also reduce inflammation, a hidden factor that can disturb sleep patterns in seniors. To enjoy tart cherries, try sipping 8 ounces of pure tart cherry juice about an hour before bedtime or snack on a handful of dried tart cherries. Just be mindful to choose products without added sugars. 2 walnuts, the brain's gentle embrace. Walnuts have a unique edge in the sleep support arena because they offer both melatonin and a healthy dose of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s, especially DHA, support brain health and reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety, 2 silent culprits that often keep seniors awake. Take John, a retired teacher who found himself battling insomnia after his wife passed away. Adding walnuts to his nightly snack not only helped his mood but also eased his mind, making it easier for him to drift off. Magnesium in walnuts further helps relax muscles and calm the nervous system, reducing the physical tension that can keep sleep at bay. A small handful, about 1 ounce, before bed is all it takes. 3 leafy greens, nature's tranquilizer. Spinach, kale, Swiss chard. These greens are powerhouses of magnesium, the mineral many seniors lack. Magnesium is crucial because it helps regulate GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, a neurotransmitter that quiets brain activity. When GABA levels are low, the mind can race at night, making it impossible to fall asleep. Leafy greens also contain calcium, which helps the brain use tryptophan to manufacture melatonin. Incorporate a generous serving of steamed or sautéed leafy greens into your dinner, or blend them into a refreshing evening smoothie. These vibrant greens are not just food, they are medicine for the weary mind. 4. Chamomile tea, the gentle ritual. For centuries, chamomile tea has been revered as a natural sleep aid. The herb's calming effects come from apigenin, which binds to receptors in the brain to reduce anxiety and promote sleepiness. Seniors who drink chamomile report not only improved sleep, but also less nighttime restlessness. Making chamomile tea a nightly ritual is as much about the soothing routine as it is about the tea itself. The warmth, the aroma, and the slow sipping help signal to your body that it's time to wind down. Try steeping a chamomile tea bag in hot water for 5–10 minutes, then savor it slowly 30 minutes before bed. You can add a touch of honey for sweetness if you like. 5. Kiwi, the unexpected sleep booster. Kiwi might be a surprise on this list, but research shows it's a sleep superstar. Its high antioxidant content reduces oxidative stress, while serotonin helps regulate the sleep cycle. Plus, kiwis contain vitamin C and E, which support overall health. One fascinating study had adults eat 2 kiwis 1 hour before bedtime for 4 weeks. They experienced significant improvements in sleep duration and quality, including falling asleep faster and sleeping longer. Try enjoying a fresh kiwi as a sweet, refreshing dessert after dinner. It's a delicious and simple way to invite better sleep. Together, these 5 foods offer a natural, gentle approach to overcoming insomnia without the harsh side effects of many medications. By weaving them into your daily meals and routines, you give your body the tools it needs to heal and rest deeply. Remember, lasting change comes from consistency and care. These foods are more than just ingredients. They're allies on your journey to peaceful nights and brighter days. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come not from textbooks or studies, but from the lived experiences of people just like you. Real stories that echo struggles, victories, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming restful nights after years of battling insomnia. Meet Helen, a 72-year-old retired nurse whose nights used to be plagued by restlessness and frustration. "I would lie awake for hours, watching the clock, feeling helpless," she recalls. Doctors tried prescribing sleep aids, but the grogginess during the day was unbearable. Then, on a friend's recommendation, Helen began incorporating tart cherry juice and chamomile tea into her nightly routine. Within weeks, Helen noticed something extraordinary. She started falling asleep naturally, waking up refreshed, and even her mood improved. "It felt like a fog lifting," she says, her eyes bright with renewed energy. Or consider George, 78, a former engineer who faced insomnia triggered by anxiety and chronic pain. He discovered that eating walnuts and adding more leafy greens to his diet helped calm both his mind and body. "The change wasn't overnight," George explains, "but gradually my body found its rhythm again. I could finally experience deep, uninterrupted sleep." George's story highlights how nutrition and patience go hand in hand on the path to healing. Then there's Maria, a lively 70-year-old grandmother who swears by kiwi as her secret weapon. "It's like a little burst of calm after a busy day," she says. "I eat a kiwi before bed and it somehow soothes my mind." Her experience mirrors the science that even small dietary changes can ripple into profound improvements in sleep quality. These stories share a common thread: the realization that reclaiming sleep is possible without relying solely on medication. They remind us that nature, patience, and informed choices can restore balance to our nights. Behind each story lies a lesson that insomnia isn't a life sentence, but a challenge that can be met with knowledge, care, and simple changes. And most importantly, that you are not alone in this journey. Knowing which foods can help you sleep better is one thing, but weaving them naturally into your daily life is where the real magic happens. Imagine transforming your evenings into a peaceful ritual, where every bite and sip quietly nudges your body toward deep, restorative rest. Start by embracing small, gentle steps. It's not about flipping your whole routine overnight. It's about inviting tiny changes that grow stronger with time. For example, begin your day or afternoon with a handful of walnuts. Their rich texture and subtle flavor can easily become a comforting habit. As evening draws near, prepare a warm cup of chamomile tea. Let its soothing aroma fill the room as you settle into your favorite chair, signaling to your body that it's time to unwind. When it comes to leafy greens, creativity is your ally. Instead of a plain side dish, blend spinach or kale into a colorful smoothie, mingling their earthiness with sweet fruits like banana or mango. Or fold Swiss chard into a hearty stew, where its flavors deepen and meld with other ingredients, nourishing your body and calming your mind simultaneously. Kiwi, with its vibrant color and natural sweetness, makes a perfect evening treat. Imagine slicing one up after dinner, its juicy tang cleansing your palate and easing you gently towards sleep. Keeping kiwis ready in your fridge means healthy dessert is always within reach, replacing sugary snacks that might disrupt your rest. Timing matters just as much as what you eat. Tart cherry juice and chamomile tea are best savored about an hour before bedtime, a quiet invitation for your brain to prepare for sleep. Walnuts and kiwi fit beautifully into your evening snack, while leafy greens find their place at dinner, setting the stage for melatonin production as night falls. But beyond foods and timing, the true power lies in the ritual. Think of these moments as gentle signals to your body, a sequence of tastes, smells, and sensations that say, "It's time to slow down to rest." Over days and weeks, these signals build, rewiring your body's internal clock and helping you rediscover the natural rhythm of sleep. And remember, your body is your best guide. Notice how each new habit feels. Keep a simple journal, jot down what you ate when and how well you slept. This personal feedback helps you fine-tune your routine, making it uniquely yours. Finally, pairing these nutritional changes with good sleep hygiene multiplies their effect. Dim the lights, avoid screens before bed, keep your bedroom cool and quiet, and find moments during the day for gentle movement. Together, these habits create a sanctuary for your body and mind, turning every night into a chance for healing. By embracing these simple, nourishing practices, you're not just eating better, you're gifting yourself the profound peace of restful nights and energized days. As we reach the close of this journey, it's clear that sleep is far more than just a nightly pause. It is a vital pillar of health, especially in our later years. Embracing natural ways to improve sleep, like nourishing our bodies with the right foods, can transform not only our nights but every waking moment that follows. For seniors, reclaiming restful sleep means more than relief from fatigue. It is the gateway to sharper minds, steadier moods, and renewed vitality. It's about giving ourselves the gift of healing night after night, bite by bite, choice by choice. The 5 foods we explored are more than simple ingredients. They are nature's quiet helpers, gently coaxing your body into balance. Paired with mindful habits and an open heart, they can light the way toward deeper rest and richer days. Remember, the path to better sleep is a personal one. Be patient, listen closely to your body, and celebrate the small victories along the way. Your journey to peaceful nights and energized mornings is not just a possibility, it's within your reach. If this guide has inspired you or sparked new hope for your sleep, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Join our community of seniors embracing wisdom, health, and happiness every day. Your stories and experiences matter, so let's walk this path together, supporting one another toward a brighter, well-rested future. Here's to restful nights and vibrant days ahead.